everybody. This is John from All Points North, and here today, another site to show you from England's wonderful North Country, and today we're on the site of Spofforth Castle. So just give a walk around to get yourself right in the heart of Spofforth village, which is a relatively small village. We're about 15 miles from York, about 5 miles from the town of Wetherby, and about 5 miles from Harrogate as well. So kind of York, Wetherby, Harrogate sort of triangle, and got a wonderful set of ruins to show you, to share with you today. So this is what I might call the remains of a fortified manor house, and there's only one of 4 sides that exists. So if you look at this sort of open space around us, sort of this is the eastern quarter behind us, that still remains, but there have been 4 other elements with a courtyard in the centre. So it's important to recognise that what you're looking at in terms of the remains only represents probably about 25% of the original build. So if we come over onto this side, there is an interpretation board that will just give you a bit of a sense of the kind of the layout of the building, and it will enable us just to understand a bit more, I think, as we go exploring around what it is that we're looking at. So originally the castle was built in the Norman era. So the Norman era, of course, represents the conquest, the conquest of England by the Normans, 1066. William, Duke of Normandy, of course, came over with his soldiers and conquered Britain, the Battle of Hastings and all that, 1066 and all that. And the way they then sought to hold on to Britain against, of course, pushback from rival factions was to build castles. And so one of the original castles built here dates back to that era. So if I just come in sort of close up and spin you around, hopefully you can see there a kind of layout of what we're going to be looking at: the Grand Hall, chapel, bedchambers and undercroft. So this remains the castle is over sort of 2 layers, and there's very little of it is left from the Norman era. Of course, some of the foundation stones below would almost certainly date from that period. But by and large, what we're looking at today dates from the 13th, 14th and 15th centuries. In other words, a castle that has been rebuilt. And there's kind of lots of reasons for that. Many castles, of course, would be damaged during some form of kind of conflict, warfare. It wasn't the case here. This was sort of refashioned for much more kind of typical reasons, which was that of comfort. People simply began to demand higher levels of comfort. The first castles that were built, and it's useful perhaps to know that William the Conqueror introduced castles to England. They didn't really exist before that. You had wooden fortresses and kind of stockades, but the idea of a stone castle, a sort of fortified stronghold, a kind of military hold, was a new thing on these shores. William borrowed a lot of money. He brought over a Jewish community from northern France to kind of help fund that expansion and that build. But this was new, so this kind of thing didn't really exist. It had no sort of past reference point in kind of English buildings. So they were kind of new arrival. And at first, the focus was very much on, if you like, holding a territory. So it was about, kind of strength, and that's still exemplified in the walls here. If we come in sort of close up, you can get a very good sense of the construction and obviously the width of the walls, how deep and strong this was. Looking up here, I think was a sort of chimney breast, maybe a staircase would have been up here. You get a sense of it. This has definitely been a staircase. You get a sense of the strength of these kind of fortifications, and we get a wonderful, just that sort of frisson as you kind of walk through. And I know it's kind of dark in here, but hopefully you can see enough just to get that kind of sense of the kind of complete enclosure, a sense of kind of safety and security that a castle brings. And again, coming over here with the mullioned windows, hopefully bright enough for you to be able to see the depth of the windows there. So how kind of strong and secure we're talking about. But of course, as time goes on, and once you've kind of secured your land and the threats against you are kind of minimised, you might start to have a different set of concerns. And those concerns might be about comfort, warmth, privacy, a kind of whole range of things. So the castles begin to evolve from being first and foremost kind of military structures that are there to impose control upon a surrounding kind of landscape, a garrison home for troops. They start instead to become the homes of the lords of the manor, and the families, they demand a greater degree of comfort and style. And so this is what leads to a great deal of the kind of refashioning and rebuilding of the castles during the kind of 14th, 15th, 16th century, is as much for comfort as it is for security. So of course they remain, as you can see here with the depth of the walls, fantastically solid defensive structures, but now they've got a dual purpose. They're just as much about providing comfort and warmth. So you're starting to think about, how do you heat these places? How do you create sort of cozy and comfortable rooms and chambers? So there's kind of a lot more division within them. It's not simply about, how do you create spaces for troops to defend? It's how do you create places to live? So, within this, we've got the evolution of both the castle, but also the kind of English country home sort of running sort of side by side. So kind of interesting transposing between the two. So probably a little too dark in here to see, but it's beautifully well kind of preserved what's left of Spofforth Castle. A great deal of kind of stonework, and it's so quiet as well. You get this sense of it just sort of slightly abandoned by time on the edge of a village, but you kind of wouldn't know out here. It really is extremely quiet. And coming along this side on what I guess would be the southeastern wall, you get a lovely kind of elevation and just a sense of the structure and how imposing it must have appeared. And as I say, this was one of 4 corners that would have created a square in the middle, so a big courtyard that of course could have been used for a whole range of purposes, but not least to create gardens and again more kind of recreational space. So the whole focus really of this rebuilding, as I say, is really about kind of creating spaces for people to kind of live good lives, to play at their kind of leisure time as well. So let's wander through and see what we find in here. This is definitely one of the chamber rooms. So again, you're creating relatively modest sized rooms within a castle, which then of course become a great deal easier to make warmer. You can use soft furnishings, curtains and so forth to kind of keep out the drafts. Windows and shutters are starting to be used in these apertures to keep the kind of cold out. So, but at the same time, you can sort of see how it fits into a bigger, wider kind of house structure. If you look at sticking out along here, you've got the kind of floor joists, so corbels sticking out there that would have been kind of supporting the floor. So this would have been a ceilinged space, so almost certainly some kind of chamber, probably a bedroom of some description. I haven't got the precise layout, but I don't think we need to know precisely what every room is used for to just enjoy looking at it in its entirety and kind of just feeling this connection with history. It's a very powerful and kind of potent connection of knowing that had we been here, well, all that separates us really from the past is time. This is where it was played out. We know this was the home of the Percy family, and this is the great hall coming into now. We're in the underchamber. You can see the support pillars right in the centre if I come across. Great stone pillars that would have had columns rising up to support the floor. So this is the great hall. And the Percy family were incredibly affluent and powerful family of northern England. The original Percy came across with William the Conqueror, and one of his barons. And when William came with his armies and his supporters to undertake the conquest of England, of course, what he had to do was to promise them that was, if the campaign was successful, that they would be then rewarded subsequently with lands and titles and rewards. That's what basically paid for the troops. That's what paid for the campaign. So the Percy family was one of these that supported William, that had come over with him from Normandy in northern France and brought with him, his soldiers to kind of retinue. And so when the conquest was complete, then of course William had to make good his side of the bargain. And so these lands in this area were granted to the Percy family, and this became the main home of the Percy family. So again, we just come in, how well you can see from there the illustration, but it's showing here a hole cut into the rock. So again, with a cutaway there, you can see quite how quite a sort of small but nonetheless well-appointed living space was created within the castle. From the outside, the fortifications are, extraordinarily robust. You certainly wouldn't be able to penetrate them. It's going to be simply too dark for us to go up that staircase. But I think even this kind of sort of slight gloom, in some respects, just brings all the more atmosphere to our video and to our kind of presentation of it. I hope you'll agree. Otherwise, I'll come back on a sunny day and seek to capture it with better light. But there's something for me about this slight low light with the pinkish sandstone that really kind of just brings history to life. So the Percys, as I say, became one of those powerful families of magnates in the north under William. And what we also know is that a terribly dramatic event in English history happened right here in the Great Hall. We believe this is where the rebels and the Percys were lead amongst the rebels against King John in the 13th century, came together to plot and agree the wording for the Magna Carta. So the Magna Carta was a turning point in English history, a point where the barons drew a line against the power of the king, in this case King John, and basically said we need a much greater share of power. So the Magna Carta established freedoms, not for the common man, but for the aristocrats. And it's the beginnings, really, of what goes on to become parliamentary democracy several centuries later. It's the end of the absolute rule of kings. Things like habeas corpus, the right for a trial. You can't just be thrown in a dungeon and forgotten about. So key reforms were put in place, and they were agreed here. And of course, this was done absolutely in the face of stern resistance of the king. He didn't want to grant Magna Carta. He was forced to do it. In other words, if he hadn't have kept to some degree the confidence of the barons, he would have been thrown off the throne and replaced. So he had no choice to do this, but that doesn't mean he chose to do it. It's a very, very different thing. And so let's go and have a look at the kind of top side of it. It's a real kind of turning point in the beginnings of what become modern Britain. Is the end of this sense of kings can do precisely what they like because they have the role and the authority of being king. From 1215 onwards, under King John, this sense of kings can be tyrants was firmly established within English law. And so kind of Magna Carta really is the beginnings of the modern world in terms of democracy and legitimate forms of government. So it's fascinating to think that the men that wrote that did so in the Great Hall just here. In the space where we're looking at is where history happens. And there's always for me an absolute thrill in sort of seeking out these places and almost thinking, can it have a memory? Was it just chance that it happened here? Or was there a set of circumstances that made this the appropriate home? And I suppose the circumstance was that Thomas Percy, that the Percy family was so powerful, it was inevitable that if any of the barons were going to push back against having their freedoms curtailed, it was going to be the Percys of the north. But ironically, the Percy family came down to the ground with a big thump after the War of the Roses, because at the famous Battle of Towton, which is only about probably 5-6 miles away from here, which was the largest battle ever fought on English soil, on Easter Sunday in 1461, the Percy family backed the Lancastrian forces. They backed the forces of King Henry VI and Queen Margaret. They were defeated on the battlefield, and so following Towton, the soon-to-be King Edward IV instructed his forces to come here to Spofforth and to destroy this castle. So the beginnings of the destruction, the beginnings of what you can see here in terms of ruination, is a result of the Percys that had been a couple of centuries earlier absolutely on the forefront in terms of driving the reforms under King John. Got it horribly wrong under King Edward VI. They backed the wrong horse, and that was the beginning of the end. The Percy family wasn't destroyed, but their hold in Yorkshire was. And future generations of Percys become settled at Alnwick Castle in Northumberland, a place hopefully I can bring you one day here on virtually visiting. But for now, I think it's wonderful to be able to just wander through these ruins and just think about what happened right here all those centuries ago that left a profound impact on the way that we think about society, about democracy, about power, about accountability. And it all happened right here this wonderful spot in the middle of North Yorkshire, not so very far away from York. At the same time, hundreds of years, ago in our history. So just use the last of the light. We'll have one more walk around to give you the last possible opportunity to play with those controls and really explore and have a look at this wonderful structure, to really take it on, to drink in this remarkable ruin, to really feel that history, to feel the connection to these events that shaped history that happened within these stone walls. It's a cold day today, but it feels like the perfect day to explore. Slightly wet, slightly grey, slightly gloomy. For me, it's perfect castle weather. I know it looked nice against a blue sky, and maybe one day I'll come back when it is. But there's something to me about the grey stone and the grey sky. It just looks like this union that has been built between the sky and the stone, so that the castle isn't so much a construction, it's an emergence from the landscape, and it fuses with the sky to create this permanence that I find just utterly beguiling. I love it. I've been visiting castles ever since I was a child. Every single one of them I love, all for different reasons. Some are mere fragments, some are beautifully kind of preserved, some are still homes to this day, some are little more than a few stones in the ground to give us a sense of what was there at one time. But they all have their each story to tell, the individual story to tell, and they're all, to me, so worth visiting. And this little corner turret up here, just so beautiful. So let's have a wander down, and we'll walk all the way around, so you can get a clear sense of the kind of layout, what's there. As you can see up here, we have upstairs rooms still that are accessible. So it's a castle on 2 floors. But like I say, by the time that this was abandoned, really, for use in the 16th century, this was very much a comfortable manor house with, as I say, a courtyard in the centre and developments all the way round where we see this kind of green space now. So we're only really looking at a relatively small section of what remains. But nonetheless, I do think it is a fabulous place to visit. So if you're in the area, do come and have a look for yourself, a little poke around. But in the meantime, by the wonderful power of your 360-degree controls, you can literally do what you want. And isn't that just a wonderful new toy, a wonderful new experience? So let's see if we can get down into this section here. And again, just trying to give you interesting ways of seeing, looking, and understanding. So we'll go through this little archway, this little aperture in the wall. Hopefully you can see up how much natural light is left. Maybe more shapes that you're looking at now rather than kind of structures, but it's just so atmospheric. It's wonderful, and I'm the only person here. It's deserted, and I love it. Let's just give it a bit more. How could we not be enchanted by buildings of this calibre that have played such a major role in shaping the history of the country? We walk round, take it in, zoom our controls. Look at the weather damage over here as well on the stonework. It's almost like a kind of design pattern has emerged through. So this erosion that we've got on the kind of stonework, if you come up sort of close, you can sort of see. But when you move back, it's almost like an abstract pattern, because each stone has a sort of slightly, well, not slightly different, but a completely different pattern of erosion. So for a distance, it looks like a solid wall. Then you go up close, and it's more like a kind of design, like a mosaic of different stones, all of which, of course, have experienced different levels of exposure to the elements that's resulted in these kind of patterns into the stone. So I'm just going to walk around one last time to just, obviously, getting the sort of the last of today's light, but I think it looks very, very atmospheric for you to just feast your eyes on the ruins of Spofforth Castle, spelled Spofforth, Spofforth, here in North Yorkshire. I do hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoy all the videos that you watch with me. I try and bring you what I think are places of interest, and not just places of interest, but places that will be interesting to explore given the controls that you've got. Now that you've got the ability to control what you see, control your environment, what I want to be able to do is provide you interesting things to play with. And so this site to me seemed to kind of tick an awful lot of boxes. Very pretty, historically significant, but also with sufficient architectural interest that the opportunity to play with those controls, to whiz things around, to have a look, and find these kind of new ways of seeing, new ways of understanding, seemed to me particularly appropriate. So that's why I chose this castle today. So it's been an absolute delight bringing you here. I do look forward to bringing you more in the very near future. I'll go in for one last go, and then we will take it. Because say the light is very much beginning to work against us, but there's a beautiful sort of almost peachy glow, I think, from this stonework that just looks perfect now, actually, against the green and the sort of slightly grey-blue sky. It really kind of all works together, and the stonework just kind of rises up above us. You really get a sense of presence. This is a major building, even if it's only a fragmentary remains of what was once here. We are in no doubt that we're in the presence of what was once a very, very sizable, imposing and important building, suitable, of course, for one of the great barons of England, the Percy family. Another one of the apertures here to allow us just to look up, look through, and just get a sense of this structure, which I just think is absolutely fabulous. So go inside one more time before we wrap up, give you maximum value for money on this tour. I'll just stay there for a second, just let the light kind of pick up, because I know that the natural light is coming down. But in some ways I don't mind that, because it then creates the interesting apertures of the doorways look even more inviting and even more kind of mysterious, don't they, coming out of the gloom. We get a kind of real sense of impending arrival, which is tremendous fun. So once more into, and again, I just love the way that nature just finds its kind of way to harmonise. So we've got the ancient ferns up here, greenery, mosses and so forth, that really kind of creates an additional layer of real beauty, as far as I'm concerned, that just kind of works as a kind of harmonious blend of sort of coming back to the natural environment. So this idea of a blend between the building as it was kind of built and as it's now kind of ruined, that it's sort of becoming a permanent part of nature in its ruined state. And so as a result of that, then nature stakes its claim. And wherever there's a nice ledge, you're going to find birds nesting, you're going to find vegetation, forms of kind of plant life, various flora and fauna, which I think is just wonderful. It just kind of brings together in a wonderful sense. A lovely shot from here, turning around to the tower again, looking very, very elegant against the sky. Corner towers, of course, were watchtowers, allowing you to be vigilant on who was coming and going in the neighbourhood. And once more into the basement area of the Great Hall, with the columns that would once have supported, of course, the floor of the hall above us, the hall where the texts, the grievances, the workings out were done of Magna Carta in 1215, the document and the process that was the beginning of the end of the monarch as a tyrant. It was the beginning of our modern world. And again, rather dark, so I'm not going to take you within this area. I'll just walk back and I'll just hold up the camera so you can really just take in the sights of Spofforth Castle. So I've been John from All Points North. I've really enjoyed time in your company. Look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Bye-bye.